Hey guys, I'm going to be talking about 2016's winter anime season's Erased. I'm going to be delving into massive spoilers here, so be warned. Also, I'm only going to be addressing the anime series and not the manga in this video. So let's start this off on a positive note. Erased was really one of the only series that caught my eye when first looking through the winter lineup. The premise quickly intrigued me, and it seemed like the series was going to explore or deal with some heavy subjects, which immediately set it apart from the other anime of the season. However, an interesting premise and good execution are two very different things, and I felt that the execution of some aspects of the series to be very disappointing. So having said that, let's go on with my list of gripes. Number 1. The revival time jumps. Coming into this series, I was most wary about the time travel element. Many series that incorporates time travel or time jumps don't end up explaining how the time travel actually works, which is understandable given that it's a relatively complex fictional phenomena to explain. I didn't come into this series expecting a full explanation. However, what I was looking for was some consistency, and that was something the series simply wasn't able to deliver. In episode 1, this is how Satoru describes his revival ability.
あの現象を俺はリバイバルと呼んでいる。損することは分かってるのに関わってしまう。だいたい1分から5分くらい前に戻って同じ光景を見る。決まって何か悪いことが起こる直前だ。まるで誰かにお前が防げと強制されてるかのように違和感を探している自分がいる。結果何度となくトラブルを回避してきた。そのほとんどがマイナスだったことがプラマイゼロになるだけのことで、たまに今回みたく自分にとってマイナスになったりする。
So here's what we know. Revival is activated right before something bad happens. It sends him back 1 to 5 minutes into the past, and it's implied so far that the MC has successfully prevented every event that has triggered his revival ability. In this same episode, the revival ability is activated 3 times. The first time when Satoru is sent a few minutes back in time to prevent a boy from being hit by a speeding truck. A second time when the villain of the series is about to abduct a young girl. And a third time when Satoru runs away from the cops in a panic after discovering his mother's lifeless body after her murder. The third occurrence of the revival in this episode is notable because it behaves differently from the previous 2 activations. Unlike the first 2, the third activation happens after the bad event occurs, and this time it sends him back 18 years into the past instead of just a few minutes back. Thus, the third activation directly contradicts what Satoru says earlier in this episode when describing his ability. However, I'll let this slide because it's not difficult to presume that this is the first time in his life that his abilities have reacted this way, and therefore he had incomplete knowledge of his ability when describing it earlier in the episode. Just make a mental note that this is the first of many deviations that the series allows for his ability, which only serve to make the revival concept unpredictable to the point where all consistency goes out the window. In episode 3, Satoru discovers the bruised and battered Kaio lying on the floor of her house's tool shed. Moments after, Kaio's mother shows up to continue where she left off and dole out more punishment. Why doesn't the revival ability kick in here? If we assume that Kaio's continued abuse is something bad, then the revival should activate, but nothing happens. Thus, we have to deduce that the ability cannot stack up on top of each other, and that during a current activation sequence, another one cannot result. So let's update what we know. It's in episode 5 when this revival concept starts to unravel. After failing to save Kaio, and therefore failing to save his mother, the third activation of the revival ends and Satoru is returned to the present. But why? Why would the third activation stop working if Kaio isn't saved? The only answer available to us is that Kaio needs to be saved in order to expose the killer and thus prevent the bad event, the death of Satoru's mother. However, this doesn't make much sense, because Satoru can still thwart the killer's plot by saving the other 2 children, or by exposing the killer through other means. The anime doesn't address this. There also exists another inconsistency later in the episode. When Satoru returns to the present, his manager offers to provide him a place to hide. It turns out the manager is actually just trying to rat him out to the cops. Why doesn't the revival warn him before this happens? Since the third activation is over by this point, we don't need to worry about the stacking issue discussed earlier, and there's no good reason that the revival doesn't kick in here. Is it because the manager acted out of good intentions? If so, does the manager's good intentions counteract the fact that Satoru is innocent of the crime and thus preventing the revival from activating? The anime doesn't give a clear answer on this either. In episode 7, the cops finally catch up to Satoru and confront him and Airi under a bridge. The revival is activated once more, but this time out of our MC's sheer willpower to return to the past. This breaks all the established rules we know about his ability. He even goes as far to acknowledge that this is his final revival. How does he even know this? And how can we take his full word on it when just a few days ago he was unaware of the full extent of his powers? I guess my frustration with the whole revival ability is that there's no clear, established rules for how this thing works. Each time it occurs, it behaves differently, leaving the viewer to guess how it works with no clear explanation. Time travel is done best when it's used to compare the past, present, or future selves of different characters. In Erased, Satoru's revival ability ends up just being used for the sake of plot armor, and it simply comes off as a convenient tool for the MC to get another mulligan. Number 2. Kaio. Why was so much screen time given to saving Kaio? Why? This is something worth asking, especially when her impact by the end of the series isn't very major relative to the other two children Satoru saves. Her ultimate role in the last episode is to spark Satoru into regaining his memories, but this literally could have been done by any of the other childhood friends. One could argue that Kaio was given this role to maximize the emotional impact of the scene, so let's examine that for a bit. Why does Kaio maximize the emotional impact of that scene? It's because of her tragic backstory as a victim of severe childhood abuse caused by the hands of her own mother. Some argue that the characterization of Kaio's mother is way too contrived, as it comes off as one-dimensional and unrealistic. But I actually happen to disagree with this. I actually found that the depiction of Kaio's mother as a horrible abuser not totally unbelievable, although some of its presentation could have benefited from more subtlety. However, what I did find cheap about the childhood abuse backstory was that Kaio's mother was solely used to keep episodes 3 through 7 pandering to the audience's emotions to distract them from and overshadow the overly convoluted methods Satoru uses to protect Kaio. I think the focus on Kaio could have been shortened by 1 or 2 episodes, leaving more rooms to thoroughly explore Satoru's motivations in becoming a hero, or leaving more time allocated to Satoru's relationship with his other friends and the other 2 targets on the killer's list. Number 3. The MC has a crush on a 10-year-old. This is something that bothered me throughout the entire series. Why does Satoru act all flustered around Kaio? I mean, it's understandable for him to be emotional given that he saw the bloody corpse of his mother, is technically in a murder situation, and is talking to a kid that is potential murder bait. So, I get that. Also, the whole holding hands thing, fine. His big brother or parental instinct is just kicking in, and he's just trying to keep her out of harm's way. But what about this scene? Just why? Why is he intently listening to his mom and a 10-year-old have bathroom fun time while seeming to like it? This scene and others like it just feel weird and out of place. Satoru just ends up looking like a pedophile, which, okay, fine, but what purpose does that serve?
変な女。まあ俺もガキには。
I guess there was more meaning to that line than we originally thought. But in all seriousness, I think the actual reason why the relationship between Satoru and Kaio was depicted in this way is the same reason why a large amount of time was spent on Kaio's mother, more cheap emotional pandering. Except this time, it's by throwing in some pseudo-romantic moments to add more feels to the mix. 4. The kids don't act like kids. The prime suspect here being Kenya.
それは他人に全く関心ないくせにあるふりしてたろ。それはそれで一生懸命だったと思うけど、俺はさ、今の悟が好きだ。でも俺は自分の中に湧いた疑問の答えが欲しい。悟、お前は誰？
I know it's briefly explained that he's the smart one in the group, but honestly, what 10-year-old speaks like this? Also, having Kenya being this perceptive from the start undercuts a lot of the adversity that Satoru must go through in order to rally his friends to help Kaio and the other two victims. In other words, a lot of the challenge is already downplayed when one of Satoru's friends is already aware of the abuse problem and is immediately willing to be his accomplice right from the get-go. Additionally, this also makes the time travel element even more gimmicky than it already is, because Turtleneck and Earmuffs McGee here is practically on the same level as our MC. In short, the time travel doesn't feel all that believable because Satoru is interacting with 10-year-olds who seem to be able to psychoanalyze his behaviors. I realize this one is kinda nitpicky, but I still think it's worth mentioning since it really tested my suspension of belief. Number 5. The Villain. I think many people found the villain reveal to be quite disappointing. Anyone paying attention could tell from a mile away that Yashiro was the killer, given the amount of hints the show drops on you. This becomes fairly obvious in the car scene in episode 9. On their way back after grocery shopping, Satoru and his mom walk back home only to run into Yashiro, who offers to drive them back home. Satoru ends up fiddling with the glove compartment, only to reveal that it is filled to the brim with candy. Yashiro immediately comes up with an excuse to draw suspicion away from himself by saying that he uses the candy to curb his smoking habit. Bullshit, and yet our brilliant MC buys it hook, line, and sinker. Did this scene annoy anyone else? I mean, this is how to spot a child abductor 101 here. And the way Satoru seems to nonchalantly overlook the whole event is completely ridiculous. A glove compartment full of lollipops should be a dead giveaway, and yet in the next episode he agrees to get back into the car. This is a stupidly moronic move on Satoru's part, and if he was truly vigilant in looking for the killer, he would already have a bunch of red flags and sirens going off in his head about his teacher by the end of episode 9. The whole setup reveal relies on the MC being incredibly incompetent, which makes the whole scenario feel somewhat forced. As for the villain himself, we aren't given a lot of information about his motives, or a compelling reason why he is the way he is. At least with Kaio's mother, we're given some backstory why she descended into a horrible abuser. With Yashiro, we practically get nothing. Sure, we're given a brief glimpse into his psyche in episode 11, but what we are given already confirms what we know about him, that he's a sociopath with some sadistic tendencies. We don't learn anything new. I hear that this is not an issue in the manga, and that the manga actually fleshes out his character. But in the anime series, we pretty much have to settle with, he's evil because he's evil. Look, I don't want to completely trash this series. It did have some moments that I thought were done well, like when the show acknowledges that Satoru is a fish out of water in 1988 and that at 29 he has matured from his 10-year-old self. For example, the scene where Satoru stands up for Kaio after she's accused of stealing lunch money. It's an establishing moment for his character and serves to show that he is indeed an adult in the body of a child, and that he has grown closer to reaching his ideals of heroism since when he was an actual kid. I just felt that some of the issues that I mentioned earlier is what held this series back from being a great one. Well, that's pretty much all I have to say, so until next time, take it easy.